The space station was big enough to hold a small city inside it. It had wide halls with smooth floors, classrooms that looked out into open space, and a cafeteria that served food from over 40 different worlds. For most students, arriving at the Galactic Union Interspecies Academy was the most exciting day of their lives. For Nora Calloway, it was just Tuesday. She walked through the main entry gate with a single backpack over one shoulder and a paper notebook tucked under her arm. She looked around the station with calm, steady eyes, the kind of eyes that had spent years watching tree lines for movement and checking creek water before drinking it. She was 17 years old, 5 feet 6 inches tall, and built like someone who had spent a lot of time carrying heavy things up steep hills. Which she had. Nora was from a small town in eastern Kentucky. Not the kind of place that made the news much, unless there was a flood or a bad storm, which happened often enough. She had grown up in the mountains, in a house that lost power every winter, surrounded by woods that had black bears, coyotes, and copperhead snakes in them. Her father had been a Marine before he came home and became a wilderness guide. Her mother was a nurse who drove 40 minutes each way to work every single day and never complained about it once. Nobody in her family made a big deal out of hard things. They just dealt with them. That was probably why Nora didn't feel nervous walking into a school full of alien students. She just picked up her schedule from the front desk, found her dormitory room, unpacked her bag, and went to find the cafeteria. The other students stared at her. That was not unusual. There were only 3 human students in the whole academy that cycle, and humans had a reputation. In galactic records, Earth was listed as a Class 1 death world, the highest possible threat rating a planet could receive. The air was full of microbes. The weather was violent and unpredictable. The oceans were deep and full of things with teeth. The land had earthquakes and volcanoes and wild animals that could kill a full-grown adult in under a minute. And somehow, humans had not only survived on that planet, they had covered almost every inch of it. Most alien species found this deeply unsettling. Vrethians, who had armored skin and stood nearly 8 feet tall, thought humans looked fragile, soft pink skin, no natural armor, no venom, no claws to speak of. But they had also read the reports. They knew what human bones were made of. They knew that a human body, under enough stress, released a chemical into the blood that made it temporarily stronger, faster, and much harder to stop. They had a word for humans in old Vrethian texts. It translated, roughly, to the ones who should not still be here, and yet are. Nora did not know any of this while she was eating her lunch. She had found something on the menu that was close enough to mashed potatoes, and was working through a large portion of it with quiet focus. That was where she met Owen Park. He sat down across from her without asking, put a tray of something orange and steaming in front of himself, and said, "You're the new human, right?" From the Kentucky intake. "Yeah," she said. "Owen," he said, holding out his hand. "Nora," she said, and shook it. Owen was 18, tall and a little awkward, with glasses he kept forgetting to push up. He was at the academy on a physics scholarship and had been there for 1 full cycle already, which meant he knew things. He told her about the good spots in the library, which instructors were strict about late work, and which areas of the cafeteria had the best food options for human stomachs. Then he told her about Ketharu. He said it quietly, leaning forward a little, like someone sharing information that mattered. Ketharu was a Vrethian student, 3rd cycle, the son of a Union senator. He was large even by Vrethian standards, with dark grey armor plating along his shoulders and neck, and black eyes that always looked slightly bored. He ran with a group of 4 or 5 other Vrethian students who laughed whenever he said something and never told him when he was wrong. Owen said that Ketharu liked to find students he thought were beneath him and let them know it. He had knocked a Thessa student's belongings off a desk twice in the same week. He had said something to a Kalesa girl in the corridor that made her cry, though nobody knew exactly what because the translation module had refused to render it. He had never been formally disciplined for any of it. His father was a senator. The academy liked its funding. Nora listened to all of this. She nodded. She finished her mashed potato approximation. "Thanks for the warning," she said. "Just thought you should know," Owen said. "I appreciate it," she said, and picked up her tray to go put it away. Owen watched her leave and thought that she had reacted to that information the same way someone might react to being told there was a chance of rain. Not dismissive, not scared. Just noted and filed away, like a piece of trail information. There might be mud on the path. Good to know. Nora's first afternoon of classes went smoothly. She was taking xenobiology, interspecies history, basic galactic lore, and a science elective that dealt with planetary atmosphere comparison. She was good at science. She was good at most things that required careful attention and the ability to sit still and think. In xenobiology, she sat in the front row and copied down everything the instructor wrote on the board. The instructor was a 7-limbed creature called Khaleesi, named Varel, who moved with slow and thoughtful precision and had a voice like a low, steady hum. Varel did not say anything about Nora being human, which she appreciated. She noticed Ketharu when she sat down. He was 4 seats to her right and 1 row behind. He was hard to miss. He took up a lot of space in a way that seemed intentional, arms spread out over the desk on either side of him, head leaning back slightly, like someone who had decided the room belonged to him and was waiting for everyone else to agree. He glanced at her once when she sat down. His expression did not change. Nora turned back to her notebook and started writing the date at the top of a new page. She did not feel afraid of him. She had grown up in a place full of things that could hurt her, and she had learned early that fear was useful only when it told you something true. What she felt, sitting 4 seats away from Ketharu in a xenobiology class on a space station in the middle of the galaxy, was something much simpler. She felt like she was paying attention. That was all. Just paying attention. And on Earth, that had always been enough to get by. The morning of the incident started like every other morning that week. Nora woke up before her alarm, made her bed with the corners tucked tight the way her father had taught her, and did 30 push-ups on the floor of her dormitory room. She brushed her teeth, pulled her hair back, and put on her academy uniform. She grabbed her notebook and her bag and walked to the cafeteria, where she ate a bowl of warm grain porridge that tasted a little like oatmeal if you didn't think too hard about it. Owen was already there, sitting at their usual table near the window that looked out into open space. He had a cup of something hot and a data pad he was reading. He looked up when she sat down, nodded, and looked back at his pad. That was one of the things Nora liked about Owen. He didn't feel the need to fill every silence with talking. They ate together without saying much. Outside the window, a cargo ship drifted past slowly, its lights blinking against the dark. Nora watched it for a moment and then looked back at her food. She had been at the academy for 2 weeks by then. Things had been quiet. Ketharu had looked at her a few times in class with that same flat, bored expression, but he hadn't said anything to her directly. She had started to wonder, in a small part of her mind, whether Owen had oversold the danger. Maybe Ketharu had just been having a bad stretch of days. Maybe he had settled down. Maybe he picked his targets and she just wasn't interesting enough to bother with. She would think about that later and almost laugh. Xenobiology class started at the second bell. The room was medium-sized, with long curved desks arranged in a half-circle shape and a wide display screen at the front where Instructor Varel projected diagrams and specimen images. There were about 20 students in the class, from 8 different species. Nora sat in the front row as usual. Ketharu sat slightly behind her and to the right, with 2 other Vrethians flanking him like they always did. Instructor Varel was in the middle of a lesson on cellular adaptation in low-oxygen environments. It was a good lesson. Nora was following along carefully, making notes in the margins of a textbook with a pencil, underlining the parts she wanted to read again later. She was genuinely interested in the material. That was just how she was. When something was in front of her, she gave it her full attention. About halfway through the lesson, Varel paused and said she needed to step out briefly to collect a specimen tray from the storage room next door. She told the class to review the last 2 pages of the chapter and said she would be back in a few minutes. The door slid shut behind her. The room changed the moment she left. It was subtle at first. A few students shifted in their seats. Someone whispered something. Nora kept her eyes on her textbook and kept reading. She was on a paragraph about how certain deep ocean creatures on Earth had adapted to pressures that would crush most other known life forms, and she found it genuinely interesting. She did not look up. Then she heard the low sound of Ketharu's chair scraping back. She didn't turn around. She just kept reading. His voice came from behind her and to the right, slow and flat and loud enough for the whole room to hear. His translation module rendered his words into a steady, even tone that made everything he said sound worse than shouting. He said something to his companions first, something Nora's collar didn't catch fully, and the 2 Vrethians beside him made a low rumbling sound that was apparently laughter. Then he reached forward. His arm was long. Vrethians had a natural reach that was almost double that of an average human. He leaned across the space between them without even getting up from his seat and knocked the textbook clean out of Nora's hands with a single flat swipe. It hit the floor with a loud crack and slid under the desk in front of her. The room went completely silent. Nora looked at the book on the floor. Then she looked up at the display screen at the front of the room. Then, slowly, she turned her head and looked at Ketharu. He was leaning back in his seat with his arms spread out, watching her with those flat black eyes. He said something in Vrethian and her collar module translated it after a short delay, in that same even tone. Death welders look a lot less dangerous when they are sitting still. His companions laughed again. Ketharu leaned forward one more time. He raised his hand, wide, flat, open, and shoved her hard on the shoulder. Not a punch. Not something he would consider real violence. Just a push, the kind you'd give to an object in your way. A way of saying, you are not worth anything more than this. For most species in that room, it would have ended there. The target would have looked down, would have gone quiet, would have waited for it to be over and tried to make themselves smaller for the rest of the day. Nora stood up. She did it without rushing. She just put both feet flat on the floor, pushed her chair back an inch, and stood. She turned to face him fully, and there was something in the way she moved that made two students in the back row hold their breath without knowing why. What happened next lasted about 10 seconds. She caught his arm on the recovery. He had not pulled it back quickly because it had never occurred to him that he would need to. Her left hand closed around his wrist and her right hand found the inside of his elbow, and she turned her body sideways in one smooth, compact motion. The leverage was specific. Her father had shown her this particular joint lock when she was 9 years old, sitting on a flat rock beside a river, using a stick to demonstrate the angle. He had told her, the point is not strength. The point is the angle. Get the angle right and size doesn't matter much. She got the angle right. Kethoru's arm bent in a direction that Vrethian elbows were not built to go. The sound it made was sharp and dense, like a green branch breaking. 3 students in the room made noises of shock. 2 of them looked away. One small Thessa student in the 3rd row, a tiny girl named Pip, had already been recording everything on her personal log and flinched so hard she nearly dropped it. Ketharu went down. He hit the floor sideways, and the sound that came out of him was nothing like the loud, confident voice he had used 30 seconds earlier. He curled around his arm and made a low, broken noise that filled the room completely. Nora straightened up. She adjusted the collar of her uniform with 2 fingers. She leaned down, picked up her textbook from under the desk in front of her, and sat back down in her chair. She found the page she had been on, smoothed it flat with her palm, and looked at the paragraph about deep ocean adaptation. She waited. The door slid open. Instructor Varel walked in with the specimen tray balanced carefully in 3 of her 7 limbs. She stopped in the doorway. She looked at Kethoru on the floor. She looked at the room full of silent, wide-eyed students. She looked at Nora sitting quietly in the front row with her notebook open. Varel set the specimen tray down on her desk with great care. She was quiet for a long moment. I was gone, she said, in a low, steady voice, for 4 minutes. Nobody said anything. Outside the window at the back of the room, the stars held perfectly still, the way they always did, completely indifferent to everything that happened inside the small bright rooms of the people passing through them. By the time the 2nd bell rang that afternoon, the whole academy knew what had happened. Word traveled fast on a space station. There were no long hallways between neighborhoods, no distance to slow things down. News moved from one end of the station to the other in minutes, passed from student to student in whispers, through message threads, through quick looks across the cafeteria. By lunch, every student in the building knew that a human girl in the front row of xenobiology class had broken a Vrethian boy's arm in under 10 seconds without getting out of her seat first. Some students told the story with wide eyes and low voices. Some told it like it was the most exciting thing that had ever happened at the academy. A few Vrethian students went very quiet and refused to talk about it at all. Kethoru had been taken to the medical unit. His arm needed more than basic treatment. Vrethian bone structure was dense and strong, and a break in that particular joint was serious. The academy's medical staff sent a full report to the administration before the day was over. By the next morning, the formal review had already begun. Nora was asked to come to the administration wing and wait outside a set of tall grey doors while the Academy Council met inside. Owen came with her and sat in the chair beside her without being asked. They sat together in the corridor for almost an hour, saying very little. Owen brought 2 cups of something warm from the machine down the hall. Nora held hers with both hands and looked at the floor and thought about nothing in particular. The tall grey doors opened and a staff member asked her to come in. The council room was large and round, with a curved table at the centre where 7 council members sat in a half circle. They were from different species, 2 Kalesi, 1 Vrethian elder, 2 humans, and 2 others whose species Nora didn't recognise yet. At a smaller table to the side sat Dr. Cole Merritt, the human student liaison, a quiet man in his 40s with tired eyes and a very organised briefcase. He nodded at Nora when she sat down. Across the room, at another small table, sat Senator Oruvel. Nora had not expected him to be there in person. He was a large Vrethian male, older than Ketharu, with deeper grey armour plating and a way of holding himself that made it clear he was used to rooms listening to him. He was wearing formal dress, dark layered fabric over his armour, a Union emblem on his collar. He looked at Nora the way someone looks at a problem that has not yet been properly dealt with. The council head, a Kalesi named Instructor Ven, opened the hearing in a calm and measured tone. She explained that the review was to determine the facts of the incident and decide on appropriate action. Everyone would be heard. Everything would be considered. Senator Oruvel did not wait for his turn. He spoke before Ven had finished the opening statement, in a loud, flat voice that filled the room without effort. He said that his son had been attacked without provocation by a student from a species that should never have been permitted in an academic environment. He said that humans were not like other exchange students. They were physically dangerous in ways that other species simply were not, and that placing them in a classroom with normal students was like putting a wild predator in a room full of children and calling it education. He used the word primitive 3 times. He said the human exchange program needed to be suspended immediately, pending a full safety review. He said all of this very calmly, in the tone of a man who expected to be agreed with. Dear. Merritt wrote something in his notepad and did not look up. Nora was asked to describe what had happened. She did it in plain, simple sentences. She said Ketharu had knocked her book out of her hands. She said he had shoved her. She said she had responded. She did not use dramatic words. She did not raise her voice. She described the joint lock the same way she would describe a recipe, step by step, without any extra feeling attached to it. The Vrethian elder on the council asked her if she had intended to cause serious injury. Nora thought about it for a moment. I intended to stop him, she said. I didn't think past that. The council went into a short recess. That was when Pip appeared. The small Thessa student had come on her own, without being called. She was barely 2 feet tall, with pale blue skin and large dark eyes, and she stood in the corridor outside the council room clutching her personal log in both hands until Dr. Merritt came out and noticed her. She told him she had been recording during the incident. She said she thought the council should see it. Dr. Merritt looked at her for a moment, then smiled quietly and brought her inside. The footage was clear. The room was well lit and Pip had a steady hand. It showed Ketharu leaving his seat. It showed him knocking the book away. It showed the shove, flat-handed, deliberate, aimed at Nora's shoulder. It showed the 1 beat of silence before Nora stood up. And it showed the 10 seconds, start to finish, in complete detail. There was no room for argument in that footage. None at all. Senator Oruvel looked at the screen and said nothing. For the first time since he had walked into the room, he had nothing to say. The council reviewed the footage twice. They asked Pip a few short questions, which she answered in a small but steady voice. Then they went back into closed session. The wait this time was longer. Owen brought more warm drinks. Nora sat with her hands in her lap and watched a small cleaning unit roll slowly across the far end of the corridor, bumping gently against the wall and redirecting itself over and over again. When the doors opened again, the council head read the decision in the same calm, measured tone she had used at the start. The evidence showed that Nora Calloway had been struck first. Her response was found to be a defensive action. The review found no basis for disciplinary action against her. Ketharu was suspended from the academy for the remainder of the cycle. The matter of the senator's conduct during the hearing was noted in the formal record. Senator Oruvel stood up, said something sharp in Vrethian that the translation module softened considerably, and walked out. 2 security staff followed him to the exit to make sure he found it without trouble. Outside in the corridor, Dr. Merritt walked beside Nora toward the main hall. He was quiet for most of it. Near the end of the corridor, he allowed himself one small, brief smile that lasted about 2 seconds and then was gone. You handled that well, he said. I just told them what happened, Nora said. Yes, he said. That was exactly the right thing to do. They walked out into the main hall, where Owen was waiting with her bag and a look on his face that was trying very hard to be calm and not quite managing it. Behind them, down the long corridor near the cafeteria, a small group of students from different species had gathered near the message boards, reading the posted summary of the council's decision. Among them was Pip, standing on her toes to see over the shoulders of taller students, her personal log still held carefully in both hands. She had done something quiet and small and necessary, and it had been enough. On a space station full of species from across the galaxy, that was not a small thing at all. Pip had not meant to start anything. She had just shared the footage because it felt like the right thing to do. She had posted it to her personal page on the Interspecies Student Network that same evening, with a short caption that said only, "This happened in our class today." She had not added any opinion. She had not used any dramatic words. She had just put it there and gone to bed. By the next morning, the video had been watched 40,000 times. By the evening of the second day, it was closer to 2 million. It spread the way things spread when they show something people were not expecting. Students from the academy shared it first, then alumni, then people who had never heard of the academy at all but had friends who sent it to them with a short message that said something like, "You need to see this." It crossed from the student network to the main interspecies communication grid, where anyone from any registered union world could see it. It was reposted in 6 languages. It was discussed in comment sections on 3 different star systems. The comments were all over the place. Some were from people who thought what Nora had done was frightening. Several Vrethian commenters called it an assault. One popular Vrethian political broadcaster did a short segment about it, using words like unprovoked and escalation and the dangers of admitting Deathworld species into shared academic environments. He had a calm, serious face and spoke in measured tones that made everything sound like a reasonable concern. He had not watched the full footage. Or if he had decided not to mention the part where Kethoru hit first. But most of the comments were something else entirely. Students from smaller, quieter species wrote things like, "This is the first time I have seen someone like him actually stopped." A Thessi community board reposted the video with a long thread attached, where people shared their own stories about being pushed around by larger species in shared spaces and never seeing anything done about it. A Kalesa Science journal posted a short analysis of the joint lock Nora had used, written by a biomechanics researcher who found it genuinely impressive that a human teenager had applied it so precisely under pressure. The video kept spreading. Dr. Merritt saw it happening from his office in the Academy's Human Liaison Wing and felt something between satisfaction and concern. He sent a careful message to the union's Cultural Exchange Board, noting that the incident and its aftermath might be a good opportunity to review orientation materials for non-human students. He was polite about it. He always was. But the message was clear. People did not understand humans, and that lack of understanding was causing problems in both directions. The Academy's student publication decided to run a piece on the whole thing. They reached out to Nora first, who told them politely that she didn't have much to add beyond what the council had already made public. They reached out to Owen next, mostly because he had been sitting beside Nora at the hearing and someone had taken a photo. Owen agreed to talk, mostly because he felt like someone should say something sensible before the story got any stranger. The interview took place in a small room off the main library. The student journalist was a young Kalesi named Yev, who had a serious manner and took very careful notes. Owen sat across from her with his hands folded on the table and tried to find the right words. Yev asked him what he thought people were getting wrong about the incident. Owen was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She's not special. That's the thing nobody seems to understand. People are watching that video and treating Nora like she's some kind of trained fighter or a soldier or something unusual. She's not. She's a girl from a small town in Kentucky who went camping a lot and took some self-defense classes. On Earth, she's completely normal." Yev's pen moved steadily across her notepad. Owen kept going. "The thing people don't get about humans is that we grew up on a planet that was trying to kill us the whole time. Not in a dramatic way. Just in the everyday way. Bad weather, animals, disease, cold, heat, rough terrain. And so we learned. Not just the adults. The children too. You learn how to fall without getting badly hurt. You learn how to read a situation before it gets dangerous. You learn that pain is something you can move through if you have to. It just becomes part of how you grow up." He paused. What Nora did in that classroom, any human her age could have done it. That's what should make people think, if anything does. Not that she's exceptional. But that for us, she's just. Tuesday. The article came out 2 days later. It was not a long piece. Yev had written it cleanly and without extra drama, letting Owen's words do most of the work. By the end of that week, it had been read far more than the student publication usually reached, picked up by 2 larger news feeds and a popular science commentary channel that covered interspecies culture. The phrase "just Tuesday" started appearing in comments under the original video. People used it as a shorthand for the whole idea that what looked extraordinary from the outside was ordinary from where Nora was standing. Nora herself did not read the article until Owen showed it to her 4 days after it was published. She read it once, quietly, and then set his datapad back on the table. "You said I took self-defense classes," she said. "You did," he said. "My dad taught me in the backyard," she said. "I'm not sure that counts as classes." "It counts," he said. She thought about it for a second and then nodded and went back to her textbook. Pip had started sitting with them at lunch by then. She was small enough that she had to use a booster platform to reach the table at a comfortable height, and she brought her food in small containers that she opened one at a time with great neatness. She didn't talk very much at first. She mostly listened, with her large dark eyes moving between Nora and Owen as they talked, taking things in carefully the way she seemed to do with everything. On the 4th day, she said, in a quiet voice, that she had not expected the video to go so far. "Does it bother you?" Owen asked. Pip thought about it. "No," she said. "I think it needed to be seen." Nora looked at her. "You did the right thing," she said simply. "It took some nerve to bring that footage to the council on your own." Pip looked down at her food containers and was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "In my community, we say that a small light in a dark room is still a light." None of them said anything after that for a little while. The cafeteria moved around them, full of noise and different languages and the smell of food from a dozen different worlds. Outside the wide windows, the stars were the same as always, steady and still and very far away. But inside that room, at that table, something had quietly shifted, not in a loud or dramatic way, but in the small and solid way that real things tend to change. 3 students from 3 different worlds, eating lunch together. That was all it was. And somehow, that was plenty. The Interspecies Culture Showcase happened every cycle, near the end of the term. It was held in the Academy's main common hall, which was the largest open space on the station. The ceiling was high and curved, and the walls on 3 sides were full windows that looked out into open space. When the lights inside were turned low, you could see the stars clearly through the glass, spread out in every direction like a field that had no end to it. Each student or group of students was given a table and a small amount of space to share something from their home world. Some brought physical objects. Some gave short talks. Some played music or showed images or presented food. The whole thing lasted most of the afternoon and was, in most cycles, a fairly quiet and pleasant event. This cycle, people were paying more attention than usual. Word had gotten around, the way word always got around on the station, that the human girl, Nora Calloway, was participating. After everything that had happened, after the video and the hearing and the article and all the comment threads across 6 star systems, people were curious. Some were curious in a good way. Some were curious in the way that people watch something they expect to be loud or strange or dangerous. A Vrethian student near the back of the room told his companion quietly that he expected her to demonstrate fighting techniques. His companion said nothing but shifted slightly in his seat. Nora set up her table near the left side of the room, close to one of the big windows. She had brought a folding camp stove, a small mixing bowl, a worn wooden spoon, and a set of simple ingredients she had ordered through the station's supply system 3 days earlier. Flour, butter, salt, a raising agent, powdered milk, because fresh milk was hard to come by this far from Earth. She also had a small folded index card that she set on the corner of the table and smoothed flat with her fingers. The handwriting on it was not hers. It was rounder and softer, the writing of an older woman who had pressed hard with her pen the way people do when they want the words to last. It was her grandmother's recipe for biscuits. Owen had the table next to hers. He had brought a small working model of a water turbine that he had built himself from spare parts, and a printed diagram of a river system from the part of Oregon where his family was from. He was proud of it in the quiet way he was proud of most things, not loudly, just solidly. He set it up without fuss and stood beside it with his hands in his pockets. Pip had a table too. She had brought small painted tiles from her home community, each one showing a different landscape from her world, and she had arranged them carefully in a grid on a piece of dark cloth. She stood beside them and answered questions from passing students in her small, steady voice. The showcase opened and the hall slowly filled. Students moved from table to table, looking and listening. There was music from a Kalesa group in the far corner, a low, layered sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. A Thessa student near the middle of the hall had brought a working model of a bridge design from her home city and was explaining it to a small crowd. The room was warm and full of different sounds and smells, and it had the particular feeling of a place where a lot of different worlds were existing comfortably in the same space. People came to Nora's table slowly at first, and then more steadily as the smell from the camp stove started to move through the room. She was making the biscuits by hand, the way her grandmother had shown her. She mixed the dry ingredients first, worked the butter in with her fingers until the texture was right, then added the liquid slowly and brought it together into a soft dough. She did not use any machines. She did not rush. Her hands moved through the steps in the same order every time, the way they always did, because that was how her grandmother had done it and her grandmother's mother before that. A few students watched from a short distance, not sure whether to come closer. One of them was a Vrethian student named Drev, not a friend of Cathoru's, just someone who had been in the xenobiology classroom that day and had not quite looked at the world the same way since. He stood a few feet back from the table with his arms folded, watching Nora work. She noticed him and nodded. He came a step closer. She talked while she worked. Not a formal presentation, just talking. She told the small group of students gathered around the table about where she was from. About the mountains in eastern Kentucky, how the roads got bad in winter and sometimes you couldn't get in or out of your town for 2 or 3 days. About the woods behind her house, which had black bears in them, and how she had learned to move quietly through those woods from the time she was small. About how her family had lived in that same area for 4 generations, and how each generation had added things to the house and fixed things and learned things and passed them down. She told them about the tornado. It had come through when she was 12 years old, she said. She had been asleep when the siren started. Her father had gotten them all into the basement in under 2 minutes, which was a thing they had practiced. The tornado took part of the roof off the barn and knocked down 3 old trees in the backfield and was gone in less than a minute. The next morning, her grandmother had come downstairs, looked out the window at the damage, and gone to the kitchen. By the time Nora and her father had come back inside from checking the property, there were biscuits on the table and coffee in the pot. They had eaten breakfast, and then they had gone out and started fixing the barn. One of the watching students, a small Kalesa girl with pale green skin, asked in a careful voice why her grandmother had made food first, before starting the repairs. Nora thought about it for a moment, the way she always did before she answered something that mattered. Because you can't fix anything if you haven't eaten, she said. And because making something warm is a way of saying that the bad thing didn't win. The Kalesa girl was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded slowly, like something had just made sense to her that had not made sense before. The biscuits came out of the small camp stove in batches, pale gold on the outside and soft in the middle. Nora set them on a cloth on the table and invited anyone who wanted one to take it. She said there was nothing in them that was harmful to most known species, and that Dr. Merritt had checked the ingredient list in advance. People took them carefully at first. Then, when they saw others eating, more quickly. Drev took one near the end of the first batch. He held it in his large hand and looked at it for a moment before eating it. Then he looked up at Nora with a thoughtful expression. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Sure," she said. "Were you afraid?" he said. "That day in class. When he hit you?" Nora set down the wooden spoon. She looked at the index card with her grandmother's handwriting on it. She thought about the answer honestly, the way she had been raised to think about things. "For a second," she said. "But fear isn't the thing that stops you. It just tells you that something matters. I decided pretty fast that staying in that seat and doing nothing mattered more to be afraid of than anything else." Drev looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked down at the biscuit in his hand. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. Something had moved in his face, not a dramatic change, just a small settling, like a piece of something falling into the right place. The afternoon went on. The biscuits ran out. Pip ate 4 of them and asked Nora quietly if she could have the recipe, and Nora copied it out for her on a fresh piece of paper in her own handwriting. Owen sold his turbine model to an engineering student from a Kalesa world for a very small amount of station credits and was quietly delighted about it for the rest of the day. When the showcase ended and the students filed out into the corridors, the hall slowly emptied. The camp stove was packed away. The wooden spoon was washed and dried. The folded index card went back into Nora's pocket. Outside the big windows, the stars were the same as they always were. Steady, still, enormous and indifferent and beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when they do not need anything from you. But inside the station, in the warm and lit and noisy spaces where people from a dozen different worlds were learning to be in the same place at the same time, something small and real had happened that afternoon. A girl from a hard planet had made something warm and shared it. And sometimes, in the end, that is the most human thing of all.